At Subotica railway station, the atmosphere feels more like a national celebration than a regular train arrival. People are waving Serbian flags. Cameras flash from every angle. Reporters lean forward, waiting for the doors to open. Then, slowly, a sleek, high-speed train glides into the station. Smooth, quiet, almost futuristic against the older buildings around it. When the doors open, the president of Serbia steps out and makes a simple announcement. Starting today, the journey from Belgrade to Subotica will take just 79 minutes. Not 5 hours. Not a full afternoon. Just over 1 hour. To understand how big that is, imagine if your daily 5-hour road trip suddenly became shorter than a movie. That's not just convenience, that's a complete rewrite of distance. For decades, northern Serbia felt far from its capital. A trip required planning, time, patience. Now, it feels like a commute. But this moment is about more than speed. This isn't just a train arriving at a station. It's Serbia officially entering the high-speed rail era. It's also the first time China has built a high-speed railway inside Europe. And perhaps most importantly, it's a project that many experts once believed would never succeed. European regulators doubted it. Western companies questioned it. Media outlets predicted it would stall. Yet here it is, operational, fast, full of passengers. So how did a slow, aging Balkan railway, once barely relevant, turn into a symbol of global competition and strategic ambition? To answer that, we have to go back more than 140 years, to a railway built in a completely different world. Long before high-speed trains and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, there was the original Budapest-Belgrade Railway. It was built in 1882, when steam engines ruled Europe and the Austro-Hungarian Empire still existed. At the time, it was a major achievement. It connected Budapest and Belgrade, linking Central Europe with the Balkans. For decades, it carried goods, soldiers, and generations of travelers. But by the 21st century, the line had become a relic. Nearly 90% of it was single track. That means trains could only move in one direction at a time. Imagine a highway where cars must stop and wait for traffic from the other side to pass before moving again. That's how inefficient it was. The average speed, less than 40 kilometers per hour. That's slower than many city buses. A full trip between Budapest and Belgrade took 8 to 9 hours, sometimes longer if there were delays. And delays were common. Meanwhile, the world was moving faster. Trade between Europe and Asia was growing rapidly. Serbia and Hungary were seeing more cross-border commerce. Freight demand was increasing. But the railway simply couldn't keep up. It wasn't just slow, it was becoming irrelevant. Freight trains faced bottlenecks. Passenger trains couldn't compete with cars or planes. Businesses couldn't rely on consistent transport times. Think of it like trying to run modern internet data through a dial-up connection. No matter how much demand grows, the system itself becomes the limit. By the early 2010s, it was clear. If nothing changed, the line would slowly fade into the background of European transport networks. Both Hungary and Serbia understood the same thing. If they wanted economic growth, if they wanted to stay competitive, if they wanted to connect to larger European trade routes, they needed something radically different. But here was the real challenge. Neither country had the technology or financial capacity to transform a 19th century railway into a 21st century high-speed corridor on their own. And that's when an unexpected player entered the picture. By 2013, the governments of Hungary and Serbia made a bold choice. They wouldn't just repair the old railway, they would completely rebuild it into a modern high-speed line designed for speeds of up to 200 kilometers per hour. This wasn't a small upgrade. It was like deciding not to renovate an old house, but to tear it down and build a smart, energy-efficient skyscraper in its place. The project would stretch roughly 340 kilometers, linking Belgrade and Budapest with fast, modern rail. The estimated investment was around $3 billion. Once the bidding process began, many Western engineering firms expected to win. After all, this was Europe. EU standards are strict. Certification processes are complex. Most assumed a European consortium would take the lead. But in 2014, the contract went to a Chinese company. For many observers, that was, honestly, pretty shocking. At the time, China's high-speed rail system was expanding rapidly at home, but it was still relatively new on the global stage. European media questioned whether Chinese technology could meet EU interoperability standards. Critics argued that the signaling systems might not pass certification. Some even predicted the project would collapse under regulatory pressure. So why did Serbia choose China? First, experience. In just over a decade, China had built the largest high-speed rail network in the world, tens of thousands of kilometers. That kind of scale creates expertise. It's like the difference between someone who has built one bridge and someone who has built 1,000. Second, speed of execution. Chinese infrastructure projects were known for tight timelines and coordinated delivery. For countries that had already waited decades for modernization, time really mattered. Third, financing and efficiency. The Chinese proposal bundled construction expertise with competitive financing arrangements. That combination made the project financially realistic. And finally, flexibility. The Chinese side signaled that they were willing to adapt their systems to meet European Union standards, even if it meant redesigning parts of their technology. This decision wasn't just about railways. For Serbia and Hungary, it was about modernization. For China, it was something much bigger, a chance to prove that its high-speed rail technology could compete and succeed inside Europe. But winning the contract was the easy part, because soon the real battle would begin. Not on construction sites, but inside regulatory offices in Brussels. Just as construction plans were gaining momentum, the project hit a wall. In 2017, the European Commission launched an official investigation into the Hungarian section of the railway. The reason? Public procurement rules. Because Hungary is a member of the European Union, any large infrastructure project must follow strict EU regulations. That includes open and transparent bidding processes, fair competition, and full compliance with European technical standards. Brussels wanted to know, was the bidding process fully compliant? Were EU companies given fair access? Did the financing structure follow European rules? As a result, progress on the Hungarian section slowed dramatically. Construction paused. Reviews multiplied. Legal and regulatory questions piled up. In Western media, skepticism grew louder. Some analysts said this proved China's infrastructure model wouldn't work inside the EU system. Others warned about political influence and strategic dependency. But the deeper tension wasn't just about paperwork. It was about standards, specifically interoperability. European rail systems operate under tightly coordinated technical frameworks. Signaling systems, communication protocols, safety mechanisms, everything must be compatible across borders. A train traveling from Budapest to Vienna, for example, must communicate seamlessly with multiple national systems. If Chinese equipment couldn't meet those requirements, the railway wouldn't just face delays. It would be unusable within the broader European network. This is where the story shifts. It's no longer just about laying tracks or pouring concrete. It becomes a test of whether China's technology can integrate into Europe's highly regulated infrastructure ecosystem. And behind that technical debate lies something even bigger: Europe's concerns about China's expanding infrastructure footprint. The railway was turning into more than a transport project. It was becoming a geopolitical chess match. And to stay in the game, the Chinese engineering team would have to do something unprecedented: prove their systems could pass Europe's toughest certification process. When the regulatory pressure increased, the Chinese engineering team faced a simple reality. If their technology failed European certification, the entire project would collapse. It didn't matter how fast they could build. It didn't matter how much financing was arranged. Without EU approval, the railway would never operate across borders. So instead of pushing back, they adapted. In Belgrade, engineers established a dedicated high-speed rail control laboratory. Its purpose was clear: redesign, test, and verify every major system according to European Union interoperability standards. To understand how strict that is, imagine building a smartphone for a market where every charger, signal tower, and software system follows a completely different set of rules. You can't just plug it in and hope it works. Everything has to match perfectly. The most sensitive area was signaling and communication, the brain of the railway. High-speed trains don't rely on drivers alone. They depend on advanced control systems that constantly communicate with trackside equipment. Europe uses a unified system known as ETCS, the European Train Control System. If the Chinese-built railway couldn't integrate with ETCS, trains would not be allowed to operate across EU territory. The certification process was intense. More than 2,000 individual technical tests were conducted. 71 key certifications had to be secured. Every subsystem, from catenary suspension to turnout monitoring, from interlocking control to centralized dispatching, was examined in detail. Nothing was assumed. Everything had to be proven. And slowly, one approval at a time, the systems passed. This wasn't just a bureaucratic milestone, it was a technological breakthrough. For the first time, Chinese high-speed rail systems met full EU interoperability requirements. In simple terms, they earned a passport to operate inside Europe's tightly regulated railway network. That achievement carried huge implications. It meant Chinese technology wasn't just competitive on price or speed of construction. It could meet some of the strictest technical standards in the world. If they had failed at this stage, the entire strategic vision, including future expansion towards Central Europe, would have ended here. But they didn't fail, and once certification barriers began to fall, something even more important could finally happen. Passengers would step onto the trains. In March 2022, the first major section, between Belgrade and Novi Sad, officially opened to passengers. For the first time in Serbia's history, trains were running at 200 kilometers per hour. The impact was immediate. A trip that once took around 90 minutes was reduced to just 30. That's not a small improvement. That's like turning a long commute into a quick coffee break. For students, workers, and business travelers, distance suddenly felt different. Within 3 years, this section carried more than 12 million passengers. On average, around 62 trains ran daily. Annually, ridership exceeded 3.4 million. Those numbers matter because they show something important. People weren't just curious, they adopted it. Then, by October 2025, the full Serbian section was completed. The line extended north to Subotica, near the Hungarian border. Now, the journey from Belgrade to Subotica dropped from more than 5 hours to about 1 hour and 20 minutes. Think about that transformation. 5 hours is a day trip. 1 hour and 20 minutes is a commute. And once the cross-border section is fully connected, the entire route from Belgrade to Budapest is expected to take around 3 hours instead of 9. 9 hours feels like crossing countries. 3 hours feels like crossing regions. But the biggest changes aren't measured in minutes. They're measured in behavior. Real estate agents in Novi Sad reported a 30% increase in inquiries from people considering property in Belgrade. When travel time shrinks, housing markets expand. One daily commuter calculated that although her monthly ticket cost stayed the same, she gained nearly 2 extra hours every day. Over a year, that's more than 700 hours, almost an entire month of life given back. This is when the railway stops being a political debate and becomes something human. Students can live farther from campus. Workers can access better jobs. Businesses can move goods more predictably. The line is no longer a promise. It's operating. It's reshaping daily routines. But beyond Serbia's borders, something even bigger is taking shape. Because this railway was never meant to end at the Hungarian border. It was always part of a much larger map. To understand the full significance of this railway, you have to look south, all the way to the sea. specifically to the port of Piraeus in Greece. Piraeus is not just another port. It sits at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ships passing through the Suez Canal from Asia can unload there before heading deeper into Europe. In simple terms, it's one of the Mediterranean's most strategic maritime hubs. In 2016, a Chinese company acquired a 51% stake in the Port Authority. By 2021, that share increased to 67%. Since then, Piraeus has grown into one of the busiest container ports in Europe. Now imagine connecting that port directly to Central Europe through fast, modern rail. That's the bigger vision. Under what's often called the China-Europe Land-Sea Express Line, cargo ships arrive at Piraeus from Asia. Containers are unloaded, placed onto trains, and sent north through Greece, North Macedonia, Serbia, and into Hungary, eventually reaching markets across Central and Western Europe. Compared to traditional routes that rely heavily on northern European ports like Rotterdam or Hamburg, this southern corridor can cut transport times by several days. And in global trade, days matter. If you're a manufacturer waiting on components, faster delivery means less warehouse storage and lower costs. If you're a retailer, it means shelves are restocked sooner. Speed translates into competitiveness. Visually, think of the system like a fishbone. Piraeus is the spine. The railway lines branching north are the ribs. At the top, they connect into the wider European transport network. The Hungary-Serbia high-speed railway is one of those critical ribs. So what looks like a regional infrastructure upgrade is actually part of a broader trade architecture linking Asia to Europe more efficiently. This is where steel tracks meet global strategy. And when you return to that celebration at Subotica station, you realize something. That train wasn't just connecting cities. It was connecting continents. Let's return to that moment at Subotica railway station. The flags, the cameras, the high-speed train standing still after a smooth arrival. At first glance, it looked like a national celebration about faster travel. But now you see the full picture. Behind that arrival were years of technical testing, regulatory battles inside the European Union, geopolitical tension, massive financial commitments, and a strategic vision stretching far beyond Serbia's borders. This railway faced skepticism, it faced investigation, it faced doubts about whether Chinese technology could meet Europe's strict standards. Yet today, trains are running, passengers are commuting, businesses are adjusting their supply chains, property markets are shifting. So what does this really mean? For Serbia, it means modernization, stepping into the high-speed rail era and shrinking internal distances. For Hungary, it means stronger regional connectivity and faster links into the Balkans. For China, it means proving that its high-speed rail technology can operate inside Europe's most regulated infrastructure environment. And for Europe, it means a new transport corridor that could reshape trade flows across the continent. The bigger question is this simply a railway upgrade, or is it part of a quiet reordering of Europe's economic geography, where infrastructure becomes the tool through which influence, trade, and power move? Because infrastructure doesn't just move people and goods, it moves opportunity, it moves capital, it moves strategic leverage. And sometimes, the most important geopolitical shifts don't happen through headlines or speeches. They happen through steel tracks, laid quietly across borders. If you want to understand how infrastructure is reshaping global power and which project might be next, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. Because the next railway might not just shorten travel time, it might redraw the map.